This is Peter Hoey. I'm co-chair of the Neighborhood First Advisory Committee. We have taken attendance, and all but two of our members, Howard Dickler and Eric Savetsky, are in attendance. So I will call the meeting to order. I just want to make a couple of remarks before we get into things. First of all, this meeting is kind of thought to take about an hour and a half. I actually have to leave at 2:45, so hopefully we'll be done in an hour and 40 minutes.
Peter, can you give me 1 minute just to get,
Sure,
get
sure,
things
Eleanor.
underway fully? Go ahead and if you have other stuff, but to
Okay.
get the agenda underway, just give me 1 minute to get this.
All right.
Thank you.
So just some general comments I wanted to make. During the last, I guess it's 2 weeks, is Ken coming?
Ken he indicated he would be attending, yes.
Okay. Ken Bogrand, Doug Tucker, and I have met on 3 occasions to prepare for today's meeting. We've toured all the sites of the existing and the future SI projects, which was very interesting. We have updated and clarified the list. I think we had that at the last meeting, and we updated that SHI list, the SHI management list, which we're going to go over shortly, and Tucker will lead that discussion. And we've created the first draft of a document, which I think we've now passed out. Does everybody have that? That's our attempt to kind of figure out what our options are. And this is definitely just a first draft. The final of that has got to be created by this whole committee, and we will look forward to your input. Penny will get you a copy of that.
Oh, okay, I just had a question.
Yes,
Is anybody attending by phone?
Doug Abbey is on the phone.
Thank you.
And you said Mr. Dickler is not here?
Mr. Dickler is not here, and Eric Savetsky is not here.
Gotcha.
Otherwise, we are complete. So that's a very interesting document. I think you'll find it will be useful to us, but it needs work and input from all of you. The agenda today is designed to allow us to review where the town is now relative to its SHI requirements long-term, and discuss what our committee's role will be going forward to meet those goals. Our first order of business is the approval of today's agenda, so if I could have a motion? Second? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
That is approved. Item 3 is a review of the SHI list management document, and I'm going to ask Tucker to take you all through that.
Yeah,
Yes, you should.
Peter,
Yes,
Doug should identify himself when he votes.
okay.
It's actually supposed to be a,
And vote.
yeah, it's supposed to be call out, basically. You do a hand count when there's someone
Okay.
participating remotely.
Yeah.
So you
Okay.
go around and say aye, and
Oh,
that says
you
aye.
have to do it one by one, huh?
Yeah.
How formal are we these days? Okay, there is not a review of the minutes. We have decided to postpone the minutes. They are in a format that we would like to modify slightly. And so we will approve those minutes along with this meeting's minutes at our next meeting.
Could you tell me how you'd like to modify them, because I'm going to be taking them.
Well, Megan has a format that she typically uses for the trust meeting, and so like rather than spend too much time trying to sort it out right here, perhaps the 3 of us could speak after this.
Okay.
I just actually had,
Penny Dye?
thank you. I had just sent an email half an hour ago to Eleanor complimenting her on the format of the minutes, because I felt it was extremely informative to understand who had said what.
Yeah, it's very detailed, which is extremely helpful. It's a little. I think we want to maybe round out some complete thoughts and so forth in there. So you all will definitely be getting the revised version for approval for the following meeting.
Okay, so Tucker, would you lead the discussion on the SHI management list?
Sure. So in the in an email that you all would have received, there is basically a 2.5-page document that we've titled the Nantucket SHI List Management discussion draft, and this is an effort to translate the table, which you all had a chance to look at the prior meeting, into hopefully what is a little more useful and digestible format, with some narrative explaining where we are and where we will be if certain things that are in the pipeline were to continue to fruition. So I'll just try to run through it relatively briefly and then really field any questions that folks have.
Would you, and you're going to start with the rules and the traps that we have to, so
Sure.
that people understand
Yes.
why things are coming on and going off the list?
Sure. So as Peter's mentioning, and I think everyone on this committee probably has an appreciation for at this point. The rules that the state has around the 10% requirement and what counts and doesn't count and when it counts and when it can fall off of your list, from the state are fairly complex. And so this is an effort to try to get this into a format that the average person can benefit from reading and understand more or less how things work. So as Peter notes, just because something goes onto a list, it does not mean that it automatically stays there forever. You'll see in the center of the first page a chart titled Makeup of Current Shy Count, and on there you will see a number of different projects as described, which comprise our current 191 unit count on the SHI list as maintained by the Department of Housing and Community Development. So, for example, you'll see on there the Housing Authority development at Myacomet Village is the single largest contributor presently to our SHI count with 46 units. Other things on there, Abrams Quarry, the first 40B project on the island, contributes 7 units. There are scattered site rentals, largely part of Housing Nantucket's program, that comprise 8 units. Landmark House contributes 26. Academy Hill contributes 27. And up near the top, you'll see our most recent additions to the list. 40 units of the Richmond rental project now count on the list. 4 units at Housing Nantucket's 7 Surfside Road project count on the list, and 15 units actually that are part of the approved comprehensive permit for Surfside Crossing count presently on the list. Now, as again, Peter references, things can fall off the list. So Surfside Crossing, if building permits are not pulled for those units within a year of the comprehensive permit issuance date, those will fall off the list. Similarly, with Richmond, those units count as a result, in part anyway, of their having pulled the building permits for those 40 units. If they do not receive certificates of occupancy within 18 months, which is basically the end of 2020, then those would fall off the list. Now, I will say, in Richmond's case, they're planning to have COs, file for COs later this year in 2019, so well ahead of the 18-month requirement. But those are the rules. If those things do not happen, they fall off.
Tucker?
Yes.
If I may.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure out how many of the 191 units are no longer at risk of falling off. Let's take Myacomet Village. Are some of those 46 occupied and?
They're all occupied.
So would it be fair to say they're all then permanently?
I'll let the Housing
Credited?
Authority
Well, I
member.
was just gonna say, that my understanding is the only 2 projects that are at risk of falling off the list are the 2 most recent ones, right? Everything else is already built and occupied.
Yes, with the caveat that for all intents and purposes, the answer is yes. But there are things that need to happen in order for them to be maintained on the list. So, for example, Abrams Quarry, last year, an affordable owner wanted to sell their affordable unit, and the town, really through the trust, has a right of first refusal. They have to make a good faith effort to sell their unit for 6 months to a qualified affordable buyer. If they did not do that during that period, they do have the right to sell it on the open market, if you will, not keeping the additional proceeds. Those would go back to the town. But in theory, it could go off the list. So I'm cautious in how I answer the question.
Is it fair to say that 85 to 90% of this is?
Yes, absolutely.
In the bank?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yep.
May I raise a quick question? I was astonished that the assumption for the 2021 census is that there will not likely be a swing of more than 25 units that, you know, it just, I can't believe that there's not more year-round residences that have been built in that 10-year timeframe.
Well, if we looked at, last year we looked at a 5-year history of net new building permit issuance. And during that 5 years, there were actually exactly 650 net new building permit issuances. We did not, there's not a easy way to do an analysis of whether those were year-round or seasonal residences, but this predated any start to the Richmond project. And so I think it's probably fair to say that the vast majority of those were for seasonal homes. And you couple that in addition with the report that Judy Barrett did in 2015, the Workforce Housing Needs Assessment, that noted since the 2010 census, we'd actually lost 640 year-round residences. So, you know, I'm not saying go to Vegas and make a wager, but we think this is not an unreasonable view given what we know today. So, is that kind of, is it fairly clear where we stand today, what makes up our current status, and the risk, if you will, associated with some units that are on that list comprising the 191? So if everyone feels on the same page, if you will, about where we are, I think it's important to note that we still have 299 units to go to get to 490. That is no small task to get there. It's going to, you know, take resolve and resources. Fortunately, this group has been tasked with some of the resources that will be required. And I guess as a side note, what we're really focused on here is the 10% number. That isn't necessarily the be-all and end-all with respect to year-round housing needs on the island. But it certainly is something that is important, I think, particularly if we don't want to have to contend with solutions that we may find incompatible with our development patterns and aesthetic on the island. It is critically important for us to stay ahead of the curve. And we recently, because of the addition of the 59 units, have entered a period of safe harbor, again, needing to be mindful of what stays on and what falls off. So we are presently in this safe harbor period. As we go a little further along in the memorandum, you can see, well, you know, how do we get to that 299 and further units to meet our, let's just say, currently required 490 figure. And the 490 figure will remain in place until DHCD issues our new number following the 2020 census. And they have indicated that they would not likely be resetting our figure until late 2021, perhaps early 2022. So 490 remains in place until that point. So the things that are in the pipeline that will contribute toward the 299, the larger ones are, of course, the remainder of the Richmond rental units, 185 additional units there when it is built out. There are 19 units that are part of their home ownership project, 19 of 91 units. There actually are a handful of units at Beach Plum Village, which really should count today, and we've provided DHCD with all of the documentation, but for some reason, they're not listed yet, but should be shortly. There are scattered site rentals and ownerships that Housing Nantucket and Habitat for Humanity are planning over the next few years. And then finally, Tacoma Green, which is, has been held up in litigation, but likely will be resolved within the next year. Yes.
So, have we figured out how to get, I'm sorry, have we figured out how to get the Habitat homes on the shy list for sure now? Has that happened?
Well, the Habitat has worked very diligently to understand how they need to modify their processes in order to have them qualify, and they are prepared to take those actions so that in effect future homes, it can't be retroactive. Yeah. So if those things happen as the chart illustrates, that would bring us to 465 units. That is assuming that the 15 units presently on our list from Surfside Crossing will fall off. And, that project, remains to be seen, but, that may be in litigation for a number of years. So just for conservative estimation's sake, those are not included in these figures. So I think what's very important for the work of this group as part of the original proponent intent of the Neighborhood First program was to help ensure that we stay in safe harbor on the way to meeting the 10% requirement. It's key to look at the final chart in the document, which illustrates the best estimated timing we can give at this juncture about when the additional planned units will count toward the shy total. And it's important to understand that the Richmond project, under the current DHCD rules, really can only provide a maximum benefit, if you will, of 2 years of safe harbor. So in effect, that is what they have done with this original safe harbor period. They obviously will be creating a number of additional units, and just to restate, in Nantucket's case, it takes 24 units in 1 year to get 1 year safe harbor, or 48 units within 1 year to get 2 years of safe harbor. 2 years is the maximum that they will allow currently. So one might look at, oh golly, well, Richmond will be producing at least 24 a year, as estimated in this chart, that ought to keep us in safe harbor all the way along. That is not the case. The maximum benefit that we are going to get from Richmond as far as safe harbor is concerned, they all are going to count toward our 10%, but as far as interim safe harbor, we have gotten the benefit that we will get from Richmond. Now, there are some...
I see a lot of furrowed brows.
Okay, how can I help?
I don't think you can help.
Okay.
Well, maybe if I ask the question this way. If we find other ways to meet, say, we're in year one, right? And year two are being provided essentially by Richmond,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Years 3, 4, and 5, theoretically, safe harbor has to be provided by other entrants.
Correct.
Okay? But if Richmond is busily going along and they build out completely, there'll be a point in time where we no longer need to satisfy safe harbor because we've reached 10%.
Well said.
Is that right?
With what we're going to talk about, I think, later today,
Yes.
about the creation of an additional 25 units, the answer is yes.
Yes.
I mean, Richmond, in and of itself, represents roughly half. Their whole project represents roughly half of the 490 figure, 244 units, once it's all complete. And I shouldn't say they won't provide any further benefit. They do have some ownership units that, depending on the timing of when those come online, they could provide small incremental contribution toward safe harbor in a given year. Yeah, and that's the 7 and 6 and 6 that you see there.
I have a follow-up, but Penny,
Tucker,
yes, go ahead, Doug.
Tucker, this is Doug.
Yep.
I think the thing that's, just to wrap up this analysis that would make it useful, is to show the deficit. In other words, you've got the incremental on the last page, but then to show the negatives that show when we get out of compliance based upon this forecast, so that it becomes clear to everybody that we have a risk of being out of compliance in 2021, because there will be a deficit with respect to the 24 needed per year. So that, I think that would then make it clearer that we are in jeopardy unless we do something.
Yes. Good
Well
suggestion.
said. Well said. Penny, did you?
No, I was just gonna say, I found it helpful on this blue chart to add up the totals, and we are heavily counting on Richmond to occur. I mean, there's 299, if I did this right, and over 220 is Richmond.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
Yes.
But regardless of what Richmond does, that leaves us here in this room to figure out that last 3 years and how to create enough
Right.
units to stay.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well,
You just have
and
to do 24 a year to get one more year.
Correct.
Yes, but they can't be Richmond.
Right.
yeah.
They can be the ownership.
It can be ownership or rental, correct.
But not Richmond.
But
Some
it could be
Richmond.
Richmond ownership.
Some Richmond ownership, yes, could contribute. But for example, in the chart, Sandpiper 1 and 2, the Richmond ownership, if they created 7 in 2020, those really won't help us because we still are in a safe harbor
two, yeah.
period. It's 2021 right now that's the magic year.
And will those 6 Sandpiper units help in 2021?
Yes,
But
if they
not the
happen like
40
that.
rentals, because the rental has already been
Correct,
used up.
yes, correct.
So as Doug said, the real issue facing the town is the deficit from 24
Yep.
units in 2021, 22, and 23.
So we'll add a deficit and totals column.
But that helps define a target.
Yep.
For us.
Yes.
yeah,
Not
yeah,
an overwhelming number
No.
year to year.
and
Yep.
the time schedule.
Yeah.
I mean, we are basically the pressure relief valve here. Many of these items on here have issues. Tacoma Green is in litigation, et cetera. And the beauty is, we're not in litigation. We are relatively free to pursue a strategy that the select board approves. And so I think that's what should frame our discussions as we get to the point where Doug's going to lead the discussion on the sheets we just passed out for our options and strategies. Is everybody good with this at this point? Understand the challenge before us and for the town, really, and our role? So the next item on the agenda is the legal opinion that we got from town council.
Peter?
Yes, Doug.
Peter, before we go on, I think just to wrap this up, I think Tucker has done a great job of pulling together this data. And then I think what the finishing touches is to demonstrate how, what will happen, with some reasonable set of assumptions that would lead us to, a deficit, if that's the case, and for how long. And so then that would highlight the need for action. Because it all, if that's just the finishing touches, and then I think we have a pretty coherent statement of where we are, what the problem is, and how we can defuse some of the emotion that sits there around Surfside Crossing and other kinds of things where people are very upset, but you can be upset about something, but the real question is, what are you going to do about it? And I think, as Peter well put it, we are the escape valve, we are the solution, we have the potential to be the solution to this, but we have to make it clear that we're in serious risk of being in jail again. And I think we can basically clean this thing up and then have a document that's, I think, very cogent. It's just factual. We're not, there's no opinion yet as to how to do it, but it's just laying out the facts. I think it's very, very helpful. It's really good work that Tucker has done.
Thanks, Doug.
Team
And Thanks
effort.
again, Tucker. So we move to the legal opinion regarding the use of our funds. I assume you've all read that. I had about a half a dozen questions, which I sent to Tucker, and town council has responded to those. I'll share those with people. But at this point, we're really looking for any questions that you had after reading the responses to the in the Q&A that you might want us to forward to town council.
Well, I mean, just going through it, Peter, I found it encouraging, good news, I suppose, that the funds under the article.
Joe, can you grab?
Can you-
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That the funds can be used under the, available under the article can be used for rental buy-down. Can you be closer?
Well, yeah, just so
Yeah,
people,
I'll just stand.
people at home can hear.
That's all right, you're right. I thought that was good, particularly good news, and it was a question I had from the last time. And then the other issue that I thought was very good news was that the funds can be used to buy land, which I was frankly pretty surprised at, because I didn't think the article discussed that. Which I also think is particularly positive, because, getting to your spreadsheet, new construction candidly is a lot more efficient use of capital, in my personal opinion, than buying existing properties. So it says that this group or these funds have greater utility than I thought they did, before I read this. So, anyway.
I would agree. I was encouraged by the town council's answers. My questions were sort of aimed at understanding, once it was defined what we could do with the money, what the process is. Do we have to go to town meeting again for anything, et cetera? And the overall criteria seems to be that whatever we recommend and AHT wants to proceed with, the select board has to, is that what's called a
Correct.
grant?
Yes.
Is that, yeah, okay.
They make a grant to the trust.
They provide the grant at that point in time. So just recognize that there's that step with whatever we recommend to the, which is our role, to the AHT, that they then take it to the select board for, I'll say, approval. Penny Dye.
Through Peter to Tucker, just a quick question about whether or not you're aware of what the proponents of the article intended. The language that was brought in the article to town meeting said property. It didn't say whether the property was improved or not. My sense is they were trying to sell the article on, we're not going to create more housing, we're going to use existing. And I just want to make sure we're
Well-
clear on their intent before.
I don't want to try to put myself in the heads of either of the proponents, but I can say anecdotally, I know in the case of one of the proponents that their view may be similar in terms of the use of funds, the latitude of use of funds to how town council has described it.
Okay, I
Yeah.
just want to make sure there's not blowback on that.
Well, I can't, it's one data point in a informal conversation.
But that is exactly why we asked for guidance from town council,
Yeah.
so that we understand. I get your point, Penny, about the
Yeah.
distinction between what we legally can do and what might cause a reaction. I get that. But
I just think there were a lot of people at town meeting that thought, oh, this is great, it's not gonna, it won't involve any more building.
Yeah.
I know there were people that thought that.
But that's not, so, I mean, in the illustration, the proponents had, I mean, it clearly denotes building additional units.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's helpful, thank you.
okay, so if no one has any other questions you want to forward to town council, having read that, I think we can move on to item number 6, which is the comparison of alternative solutions. And at our last meeting, Doug kind of conceived of this way of looking at the problem and looking at the potential solutions. And so, Doug, if you would take over with Tucker chiming in when needed and lead us through this, it'd be great.
Well, I'd first like to thank Brooke, I believe it was Brooke who made the suggestion that it's really important for us to lay out the alternatives for solving this problem, and then to be able to have some form of a recommendation as to whether we agree on one or maybe a combination of different approaches. So what we collectively, as a starting point, we put together a list of 10 criteria that we thought captured what would be good measurement tools or criteria to compare some alternatives, and they are listed at the top. And then on the left-hand side, we identified 3 potential approaches. One would be the dispersed home purchases as pretty much as outlined in the materials that were presented. And the second is the buy down of existing year-round rentals, and then the third would be using these funds to build new product that would be likely to be at a larger scale than onesies and twosies. So what we then did is we thought it would be helpful to rank these. We're not yet to a point of having a kind of a total ranking or a recommendation, because first of all, we want to make sure that we have scored these things in a way that's consistent and that we haven't missed any important criteria. And so this is intended to be a draft for a discussion, and if we missed anything or if there was a different view as to how to rate these, then that's really the purpose of this meeting. So let's start off with the dispersed home purchases. And let's start, and the first point is that if we can, I think there was approximately 30 units that might, at that model, there were about 30 units that could be bought under the $20 million allocation. And the issue that is identified there in footnote number 1 is that when you're buying individual properties, it's a challenge to be able to group them all together and have all 30 of them come in at the exact time that you want in order to meet the spring 2021 deadline, for which we need to get another 24 units. And so that's the first, so we described that as being moderate. It could be helpful, but it's somewhat challenging to manage the math. The 30 units is, given that we need 300 units, the 30 units is a dent, but it's not a big, doesn't get us a long way to solving our 300 unit shortfall. On the next category, I think by design, these are dispersed throughout the island. So in terms of having housing, particularly housing for lower and moderate income households, where there may not be access to transportation, people not have cars, then having some housing in some proximity to where there are services and employment is desirable. And I think under that category, we ranked it as low. And why don't I go through all these, and then we'll pause on number 1 and see whether anybody has any different points of view or anything that they would like to add, because I don't want to just do all the talking here. The next category is, in terms of efficient use of town resources, is the ability to plug into sewer, water, other public infrastructure. And again, by definition, these would be in more remote places that would typically be on septic. The next category we have is creating new supply, which is not necessarily gets you closer to, if you create new supply, then it's pure economics. If you have more of something, then the price goes down. So what we really are trying to do, I think, in order to get to the 10% target, is to have a much bigger supply of affordable housing. And so if you're basically buying existing housing, you're really not dealing with the problem of the shortage of supply. So that's the limitation on buying single-family houses. Now, the model showed $688,000 as a sample cost of a unit, per unit. Some of these are duplexes and some of these were individual units. When you dive into the details, you'll see that at 80%, that the market rent for these units is $3,000 a month. The 80% AMI rent is about $2,000 a month, which means that if you're making 80% of AMI, which is around $90,000, you can afford $2,000. So if you bought one of these properties per unit, it's nearly $700,000, then the rent that you would get is, the market rent is $3,000. And the person who gets this unit pays $2,000. So they're really getting a benefit of $1,000 a month, or $12,000 a year. So one way to look at this is that if you spend $700,000 to get a unit, and then you're getting a benefit of saving an individual $12,000, that would be described in general as a pretty low return on capital, something like 1.5 or 2%. So it's a pretty expensive way of subsidizing, of getting a $12,000 a year benefit is to spend $700,000. And we haven't completely laid that out, but I thought for this group we would at least, and we can do that in the future.
Well, it's,
And then
Doug,
Doug, Joe has a question.
just to comment on that, it's actually worse than that, because you're buying a market rate property at $700,000 that would command a $3,000 rent, and you're converting it to an affordable property, only resulting in $2,000 a month rent. It's not worth $700,000 anymore. So the taxpayer is eating a third, assuming it's all linear, is eating $175,000 in declining value in the asset, which is just part of what happens here.
Good point. And you're also potentially taking out of the inventory an existing resident, year-round resident, who would have to be who would have to be evicted. Is maybe a harsh word, but you would have to move a market rent paying person who is a member of the community out in order to make that unit available for a subsidized somebody in who qualifies under those regulations. One thing that I think most people don't understand is just the massive benefit that you can get. You'll see when we get down to the number 3. But there are very large subsidies available from off-island. This is free money, in effect, from federal and state sources that can come in to subsidize. And that would be not available in the event that you're just buying existing houses, because the subsidies are primarily for new construction. So I think that summarizes, the high points. There are some footnotes there. One question that we thought was worth noting was that the maintenance of an existing single-family home, I think we all know in Nantucket, is variable in terms of the predictability of what happens when the roof fails and so forth. And to be a landlord certainly has risks of cost exposure. The other thing is that if we go out and buy a house, and the town is trying to buy a house, who are they going to be competing with? They're going to be competing with exactly the audience that we want to be serving. So you'll have more demand for units. The town will be competing with members of the community to buy something. So I think that's a limitation of that approach. Why don't we pause and see whether we missed anything in terms of either criteria, or whether anybody has any different view of how we might rank or present this information.
I just have one comment, and then Penny wants to make a comment. The goal here is to not conclude that we're going to totally eliminate item number 1, strategy 1, 2 or 3. The idea, we may still want to do some of what we consider today to be the least desirable of the 3. It's not an all or none situation here as we go through this. Penny?
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to comment on. The two items, proximity to employment and goods and services and access to public sewer and water infrastructure. I don't believe they're as low as you may think in this sort of price sector. I think most of the properties on this island that are for sale under $1 million are in fact
In the core.
located in, let's be amorphous about it and call it the mid-island area, which is for the most part on town sewer and town water and has access to services. The other thing I just want to mention from a sort of broader standpoint, I feel that this group has to be sensitive to scattered site and the advantages of scattered site development, in that I think one of the factors that drove the resistance to Surfside Crossing was people in that area feel that everything has been shoved into that area. And I just think we need to be at least cognizant of that going forward. Thank you.
That's a very good point, Penny, and I think we are intended to have the comment section at the bottom is intended to reflect positives and negatives. So I think that's a good point. We will add that, Tucker can add that to the benefits. So we're not, that's a good suggestion.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, Dave?
No, I mean, I would second what Penny said. I think that it's important that we don't, I mean, all of these are great, but I think we really, in our thinking, need to remain flexible and agile in the way we can react to certain things. But I do think that the scattered is important, and when it comes to new development, we really need to focus on not creating these large developments, but again, scattering them and just being flexible and agile in the way we pick and choose.
Could you hear that, Doug?
Yes.
Oh, good, okay. Anyone else have any
Okay,
questions? Okay, Doug, you want to do number 2?
You know, I actually would prefer, is Ken there, or Ken or Tucker to walk us through number 2, because I think you're more familiar with that program than I am.
Come up here and sing for your supper, Ken.
I think you've done the homework on this.
Yeah. Ken's moving to a microphone.
The second proposal was a proposal from an individual who has acquired a significant number of properties on the island, and the proposal was that it would be a buy down of the rental stream so that they were all in the affordable range. And the idea was that it would be, the proposal was that it would provide 38 units of housing, which he believed was the number that we needed to be able to get to safe harbor. And the proposal was that each one of the units would be, the buy down would cost $250,000 each with respect to each of the units. And the issue there was that they would take care of maintenance of the property, but we would have no equity in the to show with respect to the millions of dollars that we were going to be spending in order to buy down the units. The issue there was that, again, you did not add any additional inventory to the inventory of properties that were available. And the second issue is the issue that arises with DHCD is when a property is bought, the person who is there that is renting has to go out and has to be replaced. So what you're doing is you're taking out an existing person that is either paying fair market value rent or affordable rent, replacing and moving that person out and putting another person in that only pays affordable rent. So you're dislocating as many people as you're providing new housing for with respect to the person that has to move out of the property.
Brooke?
My other concern with this proposal is the duration of the affordability covenant.
Yeah.
What are we getting? We're getting maybe 30 years?
30 years, yeah.
Rather than in perpetuity or 99 years or, so I think there's a loss of value in that as well.
So this was a single proposal of 38 apartments?
It was one particular individual who has 38 different houses on the island, and was proposing that those could be transferred at a cost of $250,000 per house. So,
That was the first offer. I mean, this was just on the top of the, what do you want to call it, a proffer, that there was really no negotiation in terms of what the actual value of the buy-down was, right?
well, we didn't have any negotiation whatsoever because we indicated that any decision with respect to moving forward would not occur until after the advisory committee met, set up some guidelines with respect to how we would spend the money and what we would end up seeing there is at the end of the day. So again, there was no negotiation with respect to that.
So we don't want to use that particular example to just say, well, we're not going to do item number 2. There may be other opportunities, but that particular one seems to be distasteful.
I'm not going to comment on that, Peter. I have a public persona here.
But we do want to, if you could continue, just in general, just talk about the concept of
Well,
rental buy-downs.
the concern that we had, that we had as a group with the concept was the fact that at the end of the day, we didn't have anything tangible for our money other than a buy-down for a period of time that dissipated at the end of a period of time. And the fact is that my biggest concern was the fact that we didn't really add anything. For every person that we were able to put in, we had to take one person out. So it was a zero net gain for $250,000. That didn't make sense to me.
Well, you were converting presumably it's converting market rate to affordable, so you are gaining affordable units.
But with
That's part of the goal, right?
with the proposal, I don't know if you can remember offhand, but was it, so if they had a property, say with 4 units on it, was it, well, we'll restrict, one at 80 and the rest remained at market, or how would that work?
Again, I didn't go into the detail of that, but he was only proposing certainly that it would be we would get one affordable unit for each of the houses.
Right.
So,
I mean, I still think it's kind of a good idea. Maybe this particular transaction doesn't make sense, but.
I'm not saying that we were looking at the one proposal that we had, which was a significant proposal, and from my point of view, it did not make economic sense in terms of what we're trying to achieve with respect to the amount of money that we're going to be spending.
So, yeah, so the proposal was basically, for $9.5 million, we're not going to add one more unit of housing on the island. And that seems odd.
Joe, you seem to be in favor of this concept, so how do you react to the fact that we end up with no asset for our funds?
Well, I disagree. I think you do end up with an asset. I agree with what Brooke said. If it's only a 30-year, but if you get a perpetual deed restriction on a property, if the town gains a permanent affordable unit, I don't know, that strikes me as something worth a certain amount of money. Now, again, I don't know what the details, I don't know whether $250,000 is the right number for the buy down or not, but, seems to me as a concept, if you had rental units, and I've always thought of this as sort of scattered around, but rental units where you could buy down in effect, buy a perpetual deed restriction, you get an additional rental unit, it's scattered, and yes, you're not gaining a residential unit because a market rate person has to move out so that a person moves in, but you get an affordable unit.
But aren't the numbers the same, Joe, in the sense that we have to value the effect of spending $250,000 to be able to buy down a market value rental to a affordable rental? And if we use the example before, we're getting a $1,000 savings for $250,000.
Right, but that's all you're paying for. I mean, in row number 1, you're paying $700,000 or more to buy an ownership unit and convert it to rental. You're using a lot more capital. It's $1 million, say. You're going to suffer the subsidy. I don't have it all figured out, but you're going to have to absorb the subsidy. You're going to have to absorb the decrease in value because you're converting a market rate house into a affordable rental property. I mean, it seems to me it's just a terrible use of money, or an inefficient use of money. Sorry for the
Okay.
editorial comment.
Brooke had a comment.
So I'm going to follow up on what Tucker said, that while the proposal that was in front of us may or may not make sense at that scale and under those specific circumstances. If someone came to us with a 4-unit property and offered us to acquire a deed restriction on one of those units, and thus the other 3 would also qualify for the shy list, then we're
Leveraging.
getting way
Yeah.
more bang for the buck
Yeah.
in that particular circumstance. So
Yeah.
I see that there are circumstances where this could be an effective tool in our toolbox. So I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand, given
And
the
and
one
I don't-
example.
And
So-
I don't even dismiss row number 1.
Right.
Sorry, I mean, I think being flexible and having, sort of tactics or transactions that you could pursue is good, because we're not gonna come up with all of these kind of units all at once, right? It's gonna be a-
Which is what I said before, is that we may end up, when the dust settles 5 years from now or whenever, having done some from each of these line items. But we're trying to determine relative attractiveness at this point of view and relative economics. David?
And again, I mean, just situationally, I just think this idea is, I mean, are we creating a bigger problem by all of a sudden creating 38 homeless people that are gonna have to shuffle, when really we're only creating it in a 4-unit home, 1 affordable unit, and then the rest are market? What's the wisdom in creating a whole nother problem around it, is my problem. I mean, if it's one 4-unit building, maybe that's a different story, but 38 seems just insane to me, so.
I think if what we're trying to accomplish is the tactics of achieving the 24 units every year, so long as the owner of the 38 properties isn't sort of holding us hostage to all 38, it's all or none, but you could use this as an opportunity to fill in where you need to achieve that 24, then maybe it's worth keeping the conversation alive with that guy.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Any other thoughts on line strategy number 2? Doug, back to you.
Okay, so I think we have new construction, a pretty good example which we've used, which is Tacoma Greens. Later on today, we will get into some specifics of a couple of sites that would be a sample of where this kind of housing could be accommodated. But at this point, let's just defer that, because and we'll really refer to the approach of new construction. And we think that there are some opportunities for which we could identify properties that would get us solve the 2021 safe harbor conundrum, with some things that we think are available. Certainly, you can, by leveraging your capital and using it more efficiently, you can get a better approach to filling in the gap on the 10%. The far right-hand column, we have, just some guesses as to the number of units that might be able to be funded. It could be 50 to 100 units, depending upon how much capital you spend and how much subsidy is available. The sites that we are going to discuss all are generally close to employment and retail opportunities, and also our public infrastructure. We are creating new supply, so by having more incremental units, that relieves some of the pressure on demand. We'll take the rough cost of Tacoma Green, which is around $450,000 a unit. Now, that's the cost, and it's a mixture of market rate. It is a mixed-in community, so it's a mixture of more market rate units, as well as, I think, 40 to, I can't remember, 80% AMI. So it's definitely offers, just so everybody is familiar with the way the low-income housing tax credit works, is that the rent is by definition affordable, because by definition you take your income and then you pay 30% of your income in rent, and that's deemed, including utilities, and that's deemed to be an affordable level of rent. So that means that the other 70% of your income is available for all of the other things that you need to live on. So by definition, you are creating, I think, deep affordability, and the reason why you're able to do that is because the state and federal subsidies are really quite substantial. So in the case of Tacoma Green, the proposed dollar amount of subsidy for those units from the low-income housing tax credit and a couple other programs is about $210,000. So if you build something for $450 and you get a $210,000 subsidy, those are dollars that are making those units available at very affordable rents, and it's really money that's coming. I call it free money, but it truly is. It's money that the federal and the state government have allocated for to make housing more affordable. So I think that summarizes. Now there is a question on the new one, which is, what is the sequence by which we could go back and get another allocation of tax credits, because they are competitive. So Tucker is working on trying to figure out when, how much might be available. But certainly it is an approach which gives you economies of scale. It's a denser solution. It's, really Tacoma Green is the model. I think you all are familiar with the design and the concept behind it, and I think that can be replicated in several sites that are available on the island. So I think I'll pause and see if there are any comments or questions.
Penny?
Yeah, one of the things that I keep hearing in my travels within the community is Sachen's Path turned out so well. Why can't we do something like that? Or why can't we do 2 or 3 things like that, maybe smaller scale? And this is just a general idea, but I think the idea of 60 to 100 units in one development is not appealing to me.
Well, why don't we defer that question
Okay.
to executive
Just an
session?
opinion.
Joe?
Just sort of curious, in terms of Tacoma Green and the 400,
Oh, go ahead, please.
I'm sorry, the cost per unit of Tacoma Green, two-part question. Is that cost based on sort of municipal construction prevailing wage laws, or is that assuming more private construction? And then as a similar question, the funds under this article, if you did pursue new construction like Tacoma Green, will you be required to use sort of municipal construction rules, prevailing wage, the whole issue we have for when we build the fire station, and
So
the
with,
costs are a lot higher than private construction?
yeah, with Tacoma Green, that is a development done by a private developer, so it's not a prevailing wage project. And those numbers are all in, so the imputed cost of the land, an imputed amount for the improvement of Waite Drive, and then the developer's own financial pro forma.
And so similarly then, you would think any sort of construction project that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Neighborhood First might fund, if that was a strategy we pursued, you would fund a private developer who wouldn't have to obey prevailing wage. And in other words, you could do it on a lower cost basis than a municipal construction project.
The intent is to have some form of a for-profit or not-profit entity be the owner. That's typically the way that it is done, which gives you some flexibility in keeping your costs under control. But I think there's still work to be done to verify that. But I think that's the intent.
Thank you.
Dave?
My fear is with a project like Tacoma Green, that is really not the spirit of what this was brought forward as. And I would just be very concerned that we will get a lot of community blowback on something of that size. And that's I get it. It's cheaper to build it at that scale. It makes more sense. But I am almost 100% positive that that's not really in keeping with what the spirit of what brought us here was. So that's just my personal feeling on it.
Okay. Any other questions? Brooke?
I'll again take the middle ground, that, yes, there's savings in scale, but there's some savings in medium scale. So I think, again, there's flexibility within the concept in terms of what we do. So,
Yeah, I mean, as a habitat guy, I mean, I don't know what the model, what the model might be. I hear you on large-scale projects, but that doesn't mean you couldn't find tracts of land around the island and build 2 or 3 or 4 unit kind of, whatever they might be, duplexes, multi-unit houses, multiple houses on a tract of land. You could scatter the developments and still build, at a modest cost. I don't know. It won't maybe as efficient as building 80 at a time, but you still could achieve some economies.
I think it's more in keeping with the spirit of what that town ordinance is about.
Okay, I think everybody's expressed an opinion on this, and we understand them, and I think we need to move on, because we want to leave enough time to discuss what possible opportunities we have. So our next agenda item is public comments. Are there any comments? from those-
Peter, can I
Yes.
just add, I just wanted to clarify something that came up just with respect to the makeup of the project in Sachem's Path. So Sachem's Path is on roughly 9 acres and is an ownership project. Only 10 of the 40 units count on our SHI list. Tacoma Green is 64 units on 3 acres, a rental project. 100% of the units all count on the list. The makeup of Tacoma Green, so Sachem's Path serves 80%, 100%, and 150% households. Tacoma Green, I think looking at the other things that were happening on the island, Richmond, et cetera, they actually have 3 units serving the 30% AMI level, roughly 25 units serving the 60% level, another 25 serving 120% AMI. And then the select board intentionally wanted to have some proportion at market rate to ensure that no one was disqualified from potentially living there. So I just wanted to
Okay.
mention
Thank you.
this.
Public comments. Anyone from the public have any input for us? Yes.
Good afternoon, I'm Andy Bacino. I'm an energy consultant. And I wanted to address the idea of use and energy use in the buildings that the town will be participating in, and to what extent there's risk to a renter or a new homeowner to be in a home that's energy inefficient. So I'm wondering if there's some criteria that have been set out, or a level to acknowledge what that is, and how can we be sure that we're building or buying properties that are energy efficient. I'm a HERS rater, and that's one opportunity perhaps to actually model houses and make sure that we're getting into houses that are viable and that aren't going to be prohibitive to someone that's at that price point. At 80%, a $1,000 electric bill, because of the heating costs, is going to turn the tides. So I will put that to the board and see if there is some consideration for that.
This is Doug. Let me take a whack at that. First of all, the 30% number does include utilities. So it's a gross rent, which is actually very favorable to the renter because the utilities are expensive, and more expensive, that means that they're not burdened by it. But the second observation is that you're really comparing new construction to existing housing. And I think subject to the codes, the current code, and in general, attached housing is more energy efficient than detached. And new construction is by definition going to have much better insulation energy efficiency than buying existing products. So, whether we want to add a criteria for energy efficiency, I think it's a good point, and it's something that I think we should take into account.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Okay, any other business to come before the committee? If not, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn, and we'll move to executive session. Can I have a motion? Yes?
You have to make a motion to close open
Close the
session,
meeting,
to go
as opposed
into
to adjourn.
executive session,
Yes.
not to return to open session, and that must be done by roll call vote,
Okay,
okay? And then I'll give NCTV a call, maybe we'll take a 2-minute recess and have them shut down the cameras.
thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
I'll make a motion
Go ahead.
to close the regular meeting, to adjourn, and then reconvene in executive session,
Not to go back.
not to go back into regular meeting.
do we have a second? Dave, any discussion? All in favor? Oh, no, I'm sorry.
roll call.
Christie?
Yes.
Brooke Moore, yes.
Joe Grouse, yes.
Dave Iverson, yes.
Posey Constable, yes.
Any die, yes?
Doug, your vote?
Doug Abbey, yes.
Peter Hoey, yes. So we are unanimous, and we are closed but not adjourned, if I understand the distinction.
Yep.
And we'll wait